I'd like to welcome everyone to a meeting of the Subcommittee of Military Personnel of the House Armed Services Committee. I'm very grateful to be serving as chair of this subcommittee. I'm Congressman Joe Wilson from South Carolina, and our ranking member is Congresswoman Susan Davis of California. We've actually taken each other's place, and I always like to point out that she served with such distinction in a bipartisan manner, and I look forward to continuing a positive relationship. Today, the subcommittee has an opportunity to influence the future of the course of implementation of a change of law regarding the service of openly gay and lesbian service members. I was troubled by the process employed to repeal the law known as Don't Ask, Don't Tell this past fall. I felt the repeal was rushed through Congress without adequate review and consideration of the full extent of the implications of repeal. I believe the lame duck session was undemocratic in that dozens of defeated Congress members adopted a law with significant consequences, but it failed to even pass a budget. It was a violation of the principles of representative democracy. Elected officials should be reflective of the views of the voters, and Congress members who had voted then had been rejected for not reflecting the views of their constituents. I believe the comprehensive review chartered by the Secretary of Defense Gates was flawed in that it was never asked military members and families whether the law should be repealed, and it took great liberties during the assessment process to count survey responses that directly expressed concern about the wisdom of repeal as being supportive of repeal. It is now essential that the Congress ask questions that were glossed over during the comprehensive review. We must get the process for considering the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell on track and ensure that our military is truly prepared to open service of gays and lesbians. We must ensure that we do not make a mistake by allowing the repeal to move ahead when there is any possibility that it will put the combat readiness of our force at risk at a time that our nation is in 3 wars with worldwide instability. We have 2 excellent witnesses who are directly engaged in this process. Dr. Clifford L. Stanley, the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel Readiness and co-chair Don't Ask, Don't Tell Repeal Implementation Team, and Vice Admiral William E. Gortney, United States Navy, Director of the Joint Staff of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. At this time, I will turn to our Military Personnel Subcommittee Ranking Member, Susan Davis, for opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Stanley, we're certainly glad to have you back. And Admiral Gortney, welcome to the committee. We appreciate both of you being here, and we look forward to hearing how the services are doing in their efforts to train the force in anticipation of the repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. Last year, as we all know, on December 22nd, the President signed into law H.R. 2965, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell Repeal Act of 2010. The law requires the President, the Secretary of Defense, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and I would say in consultation with the service chiefs, to transmit to Congress a written certification that they have considered the recommendation in the Comprehensive Review Report and the report's proposed plan of action, that the Department has prepared the necessary policies and regulations needed to repeal the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, and that the policies and regulations are consistent with the standard of military readiness, military effectiveness, unit cohesion, and recruiting and retention of the armed forces. Once they have submitted their certification and 60 days have passed, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy will come to an end, and the underlying law, which prohibits gay, lesbian, and bisexual Americans from serving in uniform, will become history. Mr. Chairman, I think the debate is no longer really on whether or not to allow gay, lesbian, and bisexual Americans from serving in uniform. The issue that we are here to focus on today is how the services and the Department are preparing and informing leadership on how the policies and regulations that are being considered have an impact, if any, on military readiness, military effectiveness, unit cohesion, and recruiting and retention of the armed forces. I look forward to hearing how the training has been going, what, if any, issues have been raised during the training, and when the Department expects the services to provide their final inputs in order to move forward in allowing all Americans, regardless of sexual orientation, to serve in uniform. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to the hearing today.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. And as we begin this morning, I have a unanimous consent request. At this time, I ask unanimous consent that the gentleman from Mississippi, Congressman Steve Palazzo, be recognized and granted a 5-minute period to ask questions of the witnesses after the members of the Military Personnel Subcommittee have been recognized. Without objection, so ordered. Additionally, at this time, I ask unanimous consent that my letter of March 8, 2011, to Secretary Stanley listing a series of questions, 49 questions, concerning implementations of the repeal, and the March 30, 2011 reply from the Secretary with his response to the questions be entered into the record. The letters have been placed before the members today. Without objection, so ordered. And as you just heard, we actually are beginning a vote, and what we'll do is recess at this time and return immediately and proceed. And it's just one vote. This is a miracle, and so we'll be back, and so at this time we'll recess, and we'll begin immediately with Secretary Stanley. Thank you. And we appreciate everyone accommodating, and I particularly want to thank the subcommittee members for their persistence to return. So this is a real testimonial to their commitment to service. At this time, we have Secretary Dr. Clifford L. Stanley.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Davis and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me and Vice Admiral Gordney to testify before you today. As you know, on December the 22nd, 2010, the President signed the enactment of repeal of Title 10, Section 654, the policy concerning homosexuality in the armed forces. And subsequently, the Secretary of Defense directed me to lead the implementation process for the Department. As the Secretary testified, the Department will execute this change in a purposeful and careful manner. By organizing a Department of the Defense Repeal Implementation Team, we've been able to synchronize the implementation of the service's relevant policy changes and delivered standardized training materials to all services on February 4th, 2011. And just 2 weeks ago, I testified before the same body and told you that as Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, my focus is total force readiness, caring for our people, creating a culture of relevance and effectiveness and efficiency. I view the total force readiness as a mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual state of preparedness and resilience. This policy change embodies that view of total force readiness. More simply put, it's also about respect. Respect is not a word that I use lightly. It embraces the true meaning of honorable service. And respect is also a word that captures the indelible bond shared by all who serve, especially those who serve in harm's way. The training materials were developed, that have been developed, are based upon the Comprehensive Review Working Group's support plan for implementation by a team of people from across all the services. Emphasis has been placed on leadership, professionalism, discipline, and respect, which we believe will enable any change in policy to be executed with minimal disruption to the force. Each service began training on or before March 1st, 2011. And while there is no department timeline or deadline for completion, the services anticipate that training will be completed by midsummer. Every 2 weeks throughout the training process, the services have provided and will provide a report on the status of training. After having received the first 3 reports over the past 6 weeks, the last of which was submitted today, the service has reported no issues or problems with training and that all is going well. It remains a policy of the Department of Defense that sexual orientation is a personal and private matter, and to treat all members with dignity and respect. Leadership, professionalism, discipline, and respect will be essential to the implementation of this change in policy fairly and consistently. Rest assured that we are committed to making this historic change in a timely manner and that is consistent with standards of military readiness, effectiveness, unit cohesion, and recruiting and retention in the armed forces. I want to thank you again for this opportunity to update you on our progress on this important policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. And at this time, Vice Admiral William E. Gortney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mrs. Davis, distinguished members of the subcommittee, and good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to comment regarding the policy and procedures that have been put in place to support the implementation of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We have implemented a three-step process to support the successful repeal of the law, the first step being implementing or changing policies, the second step being training changes, and the third step training the actual force. And we have achieved good progress in all three steps. The services have reviewed policies and directives that will require change and are on target to implement them upon effective date of repeal. The repeal implementation team of the Office of the Secretary of Defense, in full coordination with the services, developed standard training materials as well as effective plans to deliver that training. The services have implemented these plans and are proceeding smartly with the training of Tier 1, who we call experts, Tier 2, the leadership, and Tier 3, the total force. Each service has implemented systems to track the training of their force. In order to assess our progress, the effectiveness of education and training, and identify any obstacles of unforeseen issues that could impact the force, we are receiving the biweekly reports that the Secretary mentioned from the service, the Coast Guard, and the combatant commanders. These reports track the degree of progress in training the overall force and give commanders a direct line to the chairman on issues that may emerge. The chairman and the service chiefs also meet regularly to discuss this progress. We are indeed moving responsibly toward repeal. Training is underway, policies are under revision, and we're tracking the Department's progress. Our intent is to ensure that a preponderance of the force, including the Reserve and National Guard Bureau, is prepared expeditiously, but in a careful and responsible manner. Repeal will occur 60 days after the certification required by law. The Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff will certify only after careful consideration of the views of the Secretaries of the military departments, the military service chiefs, and the combatant commanders. The Secretary of Defense and the Chairman will not certify until, in their judgment, they are satisfied the force is prepared to implement the new policies and regulations consistent with our standards of military readiness, military effectiveness, unit cohesion, and recruiting and retention of the armed forces. We are proceeding deliberately and purposefully towards preparing the force and certifying their readiness. The law assured them of time to answer their questions and prepare for repeal. We appreciate this flexibility, as well as your confidence in the force and their leadership in implementing this law. Thank you for the opportunity to update you on the progress, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. And as we proceed, we'll be under a 5-minute rule, and we have a person above reproach, Michael Higgins, who is going to be the timekeeper, and he will maintain the time. And actually, the 5-minute rule begins with me, and then as we proceed, we may have time for 2 rounds, depending on the level of votes that we have. For both of you, a question I have. I hope that both of you are involved in the process of evaluating, training, and advising the Secretary of Defense and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff about whether to proceed with certification. And I have 2 questions. What are the objective and subjective criteria you will use to conclude that the education and training program associated with the repeal of the law is, first, effective, and second, sufficiently complete to justify your recommendation that the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the President proceed with certification?
Make sure I turn this on. First of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The objective criteria are very specific. The first is to make sure the policies and regulations are in sync, and we have about 87 policies that actually have to be reviewed and updated by the services. We also want to make sure that objectively that as we go toward our confirmation process, or in this, that we have the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as well as the President of the United States. They're involved in that process, and that becomes also a part of it as we look at the criteria for implementation. That's very specific. And then also we have the subjective criteria that we're looking at is ensuring that in the commander's judgment, we're looking at things like unit cohesion, standards of military readiness, effective recruiting and retention in terms of whether or not there's been any impact, as well as IG reports, Inspector General reports, things like that to look at. And I'll ask my service counterpart to talk a little bit.
Yes, sir. The objective measures are really an easy part. The policy regulations that have to be changed, what percentage of the force is trained by tier. That's fairly straightforward. The more meaningful is the subjective measures that are coming up at the same time, both through the service chains and through the combatant commanders, which is the importance of leadership in this cannot be overstated. It's the single most important thing, and feedback from the leadership on the progress of the training, the quality of the training, the questions that come up in that training, or any barriers that may come up are the critical part.
And my second question would be, following training, how will you know the troops in the field believe they're prepared to cope with the complications that will follow? Will you conduct surveys to validate the effectiveness of the training?
Well, at this time, Mr. Chairman, there's no plan for surveys, but again, as Admiral Gordney said, the leadership piece is significant here. And the relationship now with not only the President, but also we're talking about the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense, the meetings they've been having in terms of the implementation process that we've been going through, meeting with service chiefs, meeting with service secretaries, the reports we've been getting so far, and the relationship that we have with the field, the leadership piece, that subjective part is probably the most significant when it comes to keeping your fingers on the pulse of what's happening and whether or not your troops understand and, understand what the rules are.
And I would hope, I know in my 31-year service in the Army Guard and Reserves that we did annual surveys on different issues in general, and so I would hope that maybe there could be a survey question. A final question for me is in regard to religious rights and chaplains. I'd like to know from both of you, are there going to be detailed guidelines provided to chaplains to ensure they know when and where they can express their views? Where is the line drawn? A private counseling session, a hallway conversation, off-duty conversations?
Mr. Chairman, we're reviewing the guidelines now, so the specificity of the guidelines is actually under review. But for the most part, most of what's happening now with the chaplain's responsibility to serve all who are in uniform, that has remained unchanged. The chaplain still has a responsibility to serve, and we've seen no indication that that will change.
And I'm very grateful the chaplain school, the Joint Chaplain School, is located at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and my son who served in Iraq, his roommate was the chaplain, so I really do appreciate chaplains. And I really don't want them, though, to be constrained in their ability to serve. At this time, I conclude, and Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Stanley and Admiral Gordney, what issues or concerns have been raised during these training events? Could you take us through that? Have there been any issues with respect to the potential impact the proposed change will have on military readiness, on military effectiveness and unit cohesion, also recruiting and retention? Are there some issues that we should be aware of that have been raised, and any concerns or issues that you have around them?
Well, Congressman Davis, so far it's been pretty much, it's been very good. The training's gone very well. By nature, I sort of say, okay, it's gone very well, but I'm still looking. I'm certain that the commanders out there and everyone involved in the process is still looking, but it actually has gone extremely well so far. No implications on recruiting because it's actually been pretty early. We have to date now trained almost a little bit over 200,000 of the force has actually gone through training, about 9%. I'll ask my colleague here to.
Yes, ma'am. Once again, all of the subjective assessment from the commanders have been that the training has gone well. None of the issues that have come up were not things that we were not already aware of as a result of the survey that was out there that we were then able to tailor the training to answer. So thus far, no surprises, and we're pretty pleased where we are. And once again, 9% of the force has been trained.
Is something that we had talked about before, and that's that there are some generational differences in the response of the troops. And I wonder if you could comment on that briefly, and then I wanted to ask you just about the deadlines that the services are trying to meet.
Well, as far as generational, now I'm obviously familiar with the Comprehensive Review Working Group. From the repeal implementation process that the Secretary has asked me to do, that has not come up as an issue. We're dealing with the active force. We haven't done any more surveys, so we're not bringing in more data. Bottom line is that the training has been very effective, and we've been very pleased with what we've seen, but our antennae are up because this is not a rushed process, and we want to be deliberate and purposeful in doing this. That's my colleague.
Yes, ma'am. The results of the survey told us key indicators that we need to be aware of. One of them in the combat arms told us that with the combat arms parts of the forces for the different services that we're going to have to pay particular attention to them, and it gives the service chiefs the opportunity to apply the attention that's required there. And once again, we don't anticipate any showstoppers there.
Mm-hmm. The Army, as I understand it, is going to be the last to conclude their training, and I wonder what timeline you would expect then if they do meet their deadline. What is the timeline that you would expect that the President, the Secretary, and the Joint Chief, that they could actually send that certification to Congress? Have you looked at that and what we might be looking at here in terms of a timeline?
Yes, ma'am. As the Secretary said, we anticipated about midsummer in order to meet the completion of the preponderance of the force to be trained and the regulations to be in there, and to get the recommendations from the service secretaries and the service chiefs to the chairman. That deadline is really a function of the Army in order to get, just because of the size of the force and to include the Reserve and the National Guard in that's really the long pole there, and it's just a function of numbers that have to be trained.
When we talk about the President, the Secretary, and the Joint Chief sending their certification, there's an assumption there that the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs is consulting with the service chiefs as well, and that their input would certainly be very much part of that decision-making process that he would go through.
Absolutely, ma'am. The service chiefs and the chairman meet twice a week. It's a scheduled what we call the tank, and about once a month, one of the subjects is a review of how the training is going to date. And he will not take provide his advice to the Secretary until he has heard from the service chiefs.
And I just want to add that the Secretary Gates has met at least twice now with the service chiefs, service secretaries, and is in consultation also with the combatant commanders also to get their input.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. And based on the time of arrival prior to the vote, we will now proceed with Congressman Mike Kaufman of Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I think that I had requested out of the survey a by rank, by MOS breakdown, and I think that was not provided until about a month after the vote. And I want to say for the record, I think that was intentional because the numbers for those combat arms personnel, particularly in leadership, were far we're certainly more opposing greater numbers than non-ground combat arms. And so I want to state that for the record and my disappointment with the forthrightness of this process, not simply with members of Congress, but with the American people. And with that said, let me ask a question of Secretary Stanley. One of the policy implications of repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell is considering reinstatement of service members who were discharged under the policy. Given the increasingly competitive environment of joining our military all-volunteer force, how will the Department institute a fair process regarding service members who were discharged under the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy versus other former service members honorably discharged who are reapplying for active duty?
Yes, thank you for your question, Congressman. The process now, as we see it, will be that as members are coming back in, they can apply to come back in just as anyone else in America would come back in the services. There's no special dispensation, but they'll come back in, and we'll be looking at them based upon the needs of the services, MOS qualifications, their physical qualifications, where they are at that particular time, and all of that's still based on the needs of the service, but they'll be looked at and have an opportunity to come back.
Thank you. Let me just conclude with this. Somebody who served in both Army and Marine Corps infantry, that I virtually have no confidence in your process. I think that this survey, this study, was a conclusion looking for a study, and I think that this is a political decision, obviously made by the executive branch, and the military will follow it under whatever circumstances or ramifications it has to the combat effectiveness of our forces. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. And we proceed to Congressman Dave Loebsack of Iowa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to both of you for being here today and for your service. I have a question that sort of goes back to before the actual training and education. With whom did you consult, or did the services consult as to what the education programs or the training program ought to look like? How did you come up with these in the first place?
Well, I'll address part of this. I mean, I know that the services now worked with each of the services. I don't know if they had to even go out. We have excellent educational capacities within. I'm not aware of any external sources, but we have, as you know, academicians in the military. We looked at our training edifices in terms of how they're set up, and each service cooperated and worked together. We have the Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute, which is significantly steeped in terms of education research to develop the training packages as we move forward.
Methodology is one thing, but substance is another thing. Can you sort of explain the difference in that sense? I mean, it's one thing to have training programs as such and the methodology employed, but we're talking about a specific area of expertise that would be needed in this case, and that has to do with homosexuality and basically changing perhaps even the culture of the military.
Well, I think the substance, and let me add one more category,
right,
and that is we also consulted with and talked to the other countries, other nations, some who've already gone through this.
Okay.
And so when you add that in there, people who've gone through this already, that gets into substance as well as methodology.
Right. Did you want to add anything, Em? No. Okay. I appreciate that. I do have a question also, having been to Iraq 3 times and Afghanistan 6 times now in the 4+ years that I've been in Congress. I do have a question as to how you're ensuring that the training of our combat troops does not disrupt their carrying out their mission.
The service chiefs really looked hard at that, and that's why they started training the force as early as they possibly could, so they could catch the force that will be deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan before they get there. And then leave it to the commanders on the field, for those that are there, to determine whether or not it's best to do it then or when they return from their deployment. It looks at this time as if the service chiefs feel that the training can be done, but they are leaving it up to the commanders in the field to make that ultimate determination. Then we'd get it when on their return.
And so far, we have not seen any disruption in terms of their ability to carry out their mission. Is that correct?
None whatsoever, sir.
No examples, even anecdotal?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear. I appreciate that. What about retention and recruitment as a result of the change in this policy? How are we doing on that front? Recruitment and then retention.
Congressman, no data points yet. Too early to tell. I mean, it's one of these things where the environment right now, particularly with I mean, our enlistment rate, re-enlistment, everything is good, but I'm not putting a lot in that right now. It's just early, right, as we go through this. We're watching that very closely.
What are the expectations? We must have some expectations or thoughts about whether this will have any effect or not.
Well, the
on
expectation,
recruitment in particular?
sorry, but the expectations would be that there would be no impact. But by nature, I just continue to look because readiness is in the portfolio, and we have to take that very seriously.
Well, I appreciate waiting until we have data. As a former social scientist myself, I think we have to be evidence-based in this process all the way through the process from the beginning to the end. Did you want to say anything on that?
Yes, sir. And I think as far as metrics, retention and recruitment are going to be the last metrics we're going to get. It's going to take time to get that information in. However, when we surveyed the services from around the world that have implemented this, as far as recruitment, they did not see an impact to that. So we'll have to wait and see for here.
All right. Thanks to both of you, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Loebsack. At this time, we proceed to Congressman Allen West of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, also Madam Ranking Member, Secretary Major General Stanley, and also Vice Admiral Gortney. Thank you for being here today. Part of me is going to speak from the experience that I had in 22 years as a commander at the company and also at the battalion level. And one of the things I look at is the mission of the United States military is to fight and win the wars of our nation. And I think this is a very serious situation in which we find ourselves, in that we are now looking at a behavior, and we're starting to try to conform the military to a behavior. And I remember going to the military, we took behaviors and we formed it to the military. We formed that cohesion. And using a term that they have over in the Middle East, I just am very wary of the fact that this could be the camel getting his nose under the tent, and then what comes on forward from there. So with that being said, my question is this, and I go back to the episode with Major Nadal Hassan, where we had commanders up here at Walter Reed that saw some very disturbing behaviors there with Major Nadal Hassan. But for whatever reason, I think that one of the main reasons is the retribution of an atmosphere of political correctness. They did not speak up about that, and of course we know what happened when he was transferred down to Fort Hood, Texas. How do you let us in this committee, or give us the comfort in knowing that commanders and leaders that are out there and see failures in the implementation of this program are free to speak up and not have to worry about an environment, a political environment, where they are told to shut up and make this happen or else?
Well, Congressman West, thank you for the question. I think it starts with the President of the United States, goes to Secretary of Defense and the Chairman in terms of selecting the very best leaders. I think that nothing can be said even stronger about having the best people. This is about leadership, as Admiral Gortney said. We all know that this world we live in doesn't have perfection, but we know we can do better. And as a person who's charged with readiness, I'm not saying I own that, but I will tell you that I have a role in that, in ensuring that we work toward having our leadership to ensure that what you've alluded to will not happen. I'll yield.
Yes, sir. The importance of leadership in this cannot be overstated. It's just like the importance of leadership in all of combat readiness. And as I read the results of the survey, the thing that jumped out at me was, once again, the importance of leadership. And that if I would be looking for where there might be challenges with this, it would be in commands that already have indicators of poor leadership. And as you're aware, what those indicators are. And it's tied to combat readiness, it's tied to discipline, it's tied to morale. And so those commands that don't have that, I know the service chiefs are looking really hard at, because they know in those individual commands they may have challenges. It comes back to leadership, and we all know that we don't have perfect leadership all the time, but we're looking as hard as we can to make sure that we do have it.
Well, the leadership is a concern, and I can tell you that having friends that are still wearing uniforms, that's their big concern. And I go back to the incident that happened back at the Fort Campbell, Kentucky, in the 101st Airborne Division, when we had the young soldier that unfortunately and tragically was beaten to death in his unit, in his platoon. But what ended up happening from there was a series from the chain of command from that level all the way up to a division commander was lost. And so that's the thing that I want to make sure of, is that we do not go now on a witch hunt because of external social engineering, special interest groups that will affect the readiness of the United States of America. So with that being said, I yield back the remainder of my time. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Colonel West. And we now have Congresswoman Nikki Tsongas of Massachusetts.
Thank you both for your testimony here today, and Dr. Stanley for your co-chairmanship of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell Repeal implementation team. It's not a simple process and many questions. But just to reiterate why we moved to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell, since 1993, more than 14,000 gay service members have been discharged under the discriminatory Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. And of these discharges, nearly 1,000 were specialists with vital mission-critical skills. Arab linguists, for example. We hear those figures over and over again. I have always believed that this policy actually threatens the readiness of our military by discharging hundreds of military personnel critical to our national security and shutting the door to thousands more. And it's also unconscionable to maintain a policy when at least 24 other countries, including allies such as Great Britain, Australia, Canada, and Israel, already allow open service by lesbian and gay service members. And that's why I've always strongly supported repeal of this policy, and I concur wholeheartedly with Admiral Mullen's distinguished leadership about this issue, his assessment when he stated in his testimony before the Armed Services Committee last year that this policy, quote, forces young men and women to lie about who they are in order to defend their fellow citizens, unquote, undermining a basic tenet of military service, which is to be honest. And so I was proud to vote for the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and I'm glad you're both here today to give us a sense of how much progress has been made and when final repeal may occur. I am hopeful that certification will occur by the second quarter of this year. So I'm curious, you're testifying basically that on both objective and subjective measurements that things are proceeding fairly smoothly. So do you have some sense of when that certification might finally occur, given that you've yet to detect or determine that there are real obstacles to it? And also, how has the Department complied with Secretary Gates' instruction that he announced on January 6th of this year to accelerate the preparation of efforts to move ahead?
Well, thank you, Congresswoman Tsongas. We have embraced, obviously, our leadership. Secretary Gates was very specific. We want to do this deliberately and purposefully, a process that we don't want to rush because we want to make sure that it's done right. At the same time, we don't want to take forever to do it. So we've been moving with deliberate speed to get it done, and just the sheer size and the numbers of people, what we're talking about, has actually shaped the process. We're looking at midsummer to go toward certification. But even when I say that, if there's something that comes out that we didn't anticipate, which is what we're looking for, particularly with readiness implications, we'd be prepared to even either slip it or whatever from that. But midsummer is what we're looking at realistically, with no problem so far. I'll ask my counterpart.
I completely agree with the doctor. Midsummer, all of the services wanted to move out in a deliberate process. No one was trying to drag their feet in this. It's really the magnitude of the challenge that's out there, and making sure that as we get our arms around the magnitude of the challenge, we don't miss anything. And so we're grateful for the deliberate process that's been laid out for it, and we think at the midsummer for the recommendation, followed by 60 days after that, repeal is achievable.
As you've looked at other countries, which you suggested you had, have you seen sort of markers, things that you know might emerge that you can anticipate and head off, or what are the lessons learned from those other countries that have moved ahead on this and done so with great success?
Well, thank you for the question, Congresswoman Tsongas. The other countries didn't have the kind of problems that we anticipate, but we are the United States, and we're a little different in terms of our culture. I mean, we are different. And so as a result, we didn't take the non-event or uneventful things that happened in other countries as being indicative of what may happen here, which is why our antenna is still up as we move forward deliberately and purposefully in the process.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Ms. Salgas. We next proceed to Congresswoman Vicki Hartzler of Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. There has been some discussion that certain members of the military were let go, but surveys that I saw have shown that possibly up to 10% of the military that are currently in force possibly may leave as a result of this. So how will you know that this repeal won't harm recruitment or retention? What indicators are you setting up? What surveying process is going to be in place? What follow-up reports are going to be generated, and will Congress have an opportunity to see those? And what's anticipated? How will you gather that information?
Well, thank you, Congresswoman Hartzler. First of all, thank you for the question, because I wanted to come back to something that was asked earlier. We do climate surveys, by the way, and this is a commander's tool that's available to them to do assessments, routinely. That's a constant. Also, it's difficult to forecast. We haven't seen any indication that that would happen, but there's an obligation now that each service member takes. They have a contract, and just because you want to get out, you don't get out. Now, it doesn't mean that the commander, though, on the ground makes the call according to good order and discipline and what's most effective for the unit. But the bottom line is that it's not an automatic. But the readiness implications are significant if everyone wanted to get out. We don't have the data point that you have to say that whatever the percentage is that wants to get out, I'll yield at this time.
Yes, ma'am. One of the things from the other services from around the world that implemented it, they had a similar perception that more people would get out at the end of, in reality, it didn't happen. That doesn't mean that can't happen in this particular case. Retention is a function of personal beliefs. It's a function of sense of purpose, and it has a large degree with the economy on the outside. And so separating retention statistics, when we get down to it, when we're finally able to gather those, we're going to have to sift very carefully to find the true cause. And we survey for every service member that gets out. We do survey for the reasons as to why they get out.
Okay, that was a question. So when they leave, they're going to be asked that question and have an opportunity to say. And then, so is there a report? I'm new. I wasn't here when this passed. So is there a 1 year from now, the military shall report back to Congress on the implications and how many people? I mean, is there something like that in statute?
Yes, ma'am. In fact, before this very committee, we actually appear, and not regarding just this issue, but the entire shaping of our military force, the force structure, the size, the numbers that get out, the numbers that stay in, and there are a whole range of reasons for that, as well as skill, and particularly skill sets, as we deal with readiness. So there's a lot of information that comes to the House as well as to the Senate. Okay, so no report per se that's in the works, but just, okay. Can you tell me how implementation of this new policy is going to improve the standards of military readiness, effectiveness, unit cohesion, recruiting, retention? How is it going to improve things by doing this? Well, there's a lot of unknowns right now in terms of improving readiness. We do know that from an integrity standpoint, as already alluded, that we won't have members having to lie about who they are as they're serving. But having said that, the unknown right now is what we're going through in the implementation process. So ideally, we'll know more later on, but keeping the skill sets, there are people who've been discharged. We want to keep the right people in. If I took this away from the conversation of today, looking at balancing the force, looking at having the right people with the linguistic backgrounds, intelligence backgrounds, different things like that, that shaping in itself is significant, taking away this variable. And I know that's, well, this purpose of this hearing is different, but that's where I'm coming from. Well, the mission of the military is to win wars and to protect and defend the land. And I'm very concerned that in the time of war, in our country, we have men and women in harm's way, that we are making such a radical
major shift in our policy, and I believe jeopardizing missions and putting people in harm's way. So I'm very concerned. How do you think it'll increase our mission of being able to win wars by doing this?
Ma'am, it's the service chief's chairman's best judgment that it's not going to impact our ability to fight and win our nation's wars. And I happen to believe it as well. I think we can go through this based on the analysis, the detailed analysis that led us up to this point, and the process, the procedures we're putting in place to train the force, and the feedback mechanisms that are in place to get back to the chain of command. If we hear something otherwise, are all there that will be able to then apply good leadership to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hartzler, and we proceed to Congresswoman Shelley Pingree of Maine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Secretary Stanley and Vice Admiral Gortney, thank you very much for being here today, for your service to this country, and for taking on a challenging transition. I appreciate all that you've had to say today. I know we've sort of said this isn't about reconsidering whether or not we should have done this, but I want to reiterate some of the things that my colleagues have said, and Representative Tsonga said very well, that this is a good policy. This was a change that we needed to act on. I was very proud to vote for this and to support it, and for all the reasons that have already been discussed, whether it's about unit cohesion or the cost to our country. And in the end, the fact is, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was a morally reprehensible policy, and I just think that it violated the fundamental value of fairness and equal treatment that we cherish in this country, and I'm just so pleased that we're here to talk about the end of it and the transition out of it, which I think is great. I also want to say, I know some people have talked about their concerns about whether or not the surveys were accurate or how this is going to affect the actual troops in the field, and I'm pleased to hear that you've said there's been very little evidence of that. And I want to remind everyone that the survey showed that 90% of our military personnel who said that they had served with a gay or lesbian person had no reaction to it and said it was perfectly fine in their unit, and I think that's an important thing to remember. I think that's very important when we think about how quickly we implement this policy. You know, we can drag ourselves down in kind of the political window of, well, it's not quite done yet and you haven't finished the training. So I just want to push a little bit on the implementation. I'm pleased to hear that you're moving forward, that you've got 9% accomplished, but I just want to ask a little bit about, can we move any faster? Because I do believe that once it's fully implemented, it'll be a conversation we won't have anymore, and our troops will not have to think about it. They'll be working. We won't debate it politically, and our country will continue to move forward in a way that we need to do in a time of a lot of conflict. So, is there a way to move faster or hurry up on the process?
I'll just make an opening comment that the conditions on the ground and the commanders are actually driving this. I mean, it's whatever the Secretary would. Secretary Gates wants it to be fast, but at the same time, we are listening to the services, and I'll defer to my colleague.
Yes, ma'am. I think the pace that we're going on is appropriate, entirely appropriate. Once again, surveys are only so accurate. And so it goes back to, as we do the training in a deliberate manner, we train the experts first, we train the leadership, who are the key part of this, then train the force, and that we have the ability to, as the doctor says, antennas up, pick up if we have something wrong here that we need to go back and address. And we're going to have to collect that information, we're going to have to assess and come up with a way to address it head on. And the only way to do that is in the deliberate process. So any faster, we might miss something. And so I think we're on the right path. I think midsummer is achievable and will allow us to pick up on anything if we're picking up any of the signals that we're so carefully looking for.
There's a 60-day statutory waiting period, right? Somewhere in there. Can any of the process that you're working on now happen during that period?
Well, actually, during the 60-day process, we actually have things even planned there. As the certification takes place, there's still a little bit more training of the force going on then, because you never really get to 100%. And that's the reality, because you always have people coming in, there's people leaving, there's people sick, there's people, in transportation. There's just lots of other things going on. So that will be doing some of that, people going into combat, coming out of combat, that kind of circumstances. So that's also in that.
Great. Well, one other point. I mean, I'm pleased to hear that you say in the time period you've gone through, it's gone smoothly. People are reacting well to it. As I understand, many of the things that people bring up as concerns, frankly, just don't happen much in the military. We haven't had incidents. We haven't had a lot of things that people have been concerned about, and there are already a lot of policies in place. People talk about, what if I need to change my roommate? Well, you can already do that, whether it's a homosexual or heterosexual roommate. Chaplains, as the chair appropriately asked, can already make a decision that they won't meet with a certain person and have it be with someone else, or if they have some issues that they have to deal with. Can you talk a little more about that? I mean, I appreciate the fact that the military already has a lot of policies in place, and they're there for people today.
That's correct, ma'am. Really, it's treating people with dignity and respect. We're not creating a special class within the military. And all of the issues that you brought up are really just leadership issues that we confront every single day, regardless of your preference. So most of the questions that do come up are what's not changing.
Great. Well, that's my time. Thank you very much. I appreciate your work on this.
Thank you, Ms. Pengria. We now proceed to Congressman Austin Scott of Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, would you agree with me that military service in this country is a privilege, not a right?
Absolutely.
And we have an all-volunteer force at this stage. Nobody is forced to join our military.
That is correct.
In this policy change that was passed, did it pass as a standalone piece of legislation, or was it tied to the Military Appropriations Act?
That I'm not familiar with, sir.
Secretary Stanley.
And I'm going to take that for the record. I think I know the answer, but I don't want to say something for the record that's not correct.
Well, would you tell me what you think the answer is?
Okay. I was under this impression that this was standalone, and I saw nothing to indicate anything other than that.
Okay.
But I just wanted to make sure there was something else there.
Okay. I'd like to know the facts about that. Next question: How much money that could have been spent equipping the war fighters has been spent on the implementation of this?
So far, the calculations for the training materials is about $10,000. The other areas, there's actually been no calculation yet. The active services are working now to compute what the timing has been for, the time taken out for training, if there's transportation costs. The services are working on that. We have that.
Secretary Stanley, if something was done at the DOD for $10,000, I'd like to know what it was. I haven't seen anything come out of there with a price tag that low, but I would like to know the price tag for this and how much has been spent on this this implementation. And I hope that as we move forward, that we're able to undo some of these things. And I will tell you, in talking to the military personnel in my district, you have a lot of men and women who we have spent a lot of money training. I can tell you the last one that I spoke with, we have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars training that gentleman on how to disarm IEDs. He will not re-enlist, nor will his brother, who has been trained the same way. They simply will not re-enlist. And you are going to lose, and this country is going to lose, a lot of very, very valuable members of our military because of this social policy. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, I yield my time back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scott. And we'll proceed with the second round. I continue to be very concerned about the First Amendment rights of chaplains. I've heard from chaplains their concern that the repeal implementation training could have a chilling effect on their speech. Chaplains are afraid to express their true beliefs because they could be penalized. With that, what procedures will be available to afford chaplains the opportunity to report pressures placed on them to temper comments and chill their freedom of religious speech? What procedures will be in place to protect such chaplains from punitive career personnel actions from supervisors and others who do not share their views?
Well, Mr. Chairman, first of all, the chaplains still have their First Amendment rights. Chaplains still serve a pretty diverse population in the military. Those same rights that existed before exist now, but the policy review we're going through is actually being conducted to address the potential that there's something that we've overlooked, and we haven't finished the policy review yet. But protecting those First Amendment rights, and also when we look at this particular equation, this question, the religious endorsers haven't withdrawn anyone, and the chaplains are still engaged. I think we're there addressing what may be potential issues, but we don't have issues yet to specify. Now I'll ask.
We're blessed to have great chaplains in the service, and there are, I am certain, moral dilemmas for all the chaplains on many issues out there. I think the policy review that the doctors bring in will help bring those to light. And we're not asking anybody to change their beliefs. We're not asking anybody to change their feelings. Just treat everybody in the service with the same dignity and respect that we ourselves would like to be treated.
But if somebody feels like they're being religiously oppressed, their First Amendment rights, is there a process or procedure where they can express concern without retaliation?
Absolutely, sir. That's why we have a chain of command. You know, I've never worked in a perfect chain of command. Never had one. Didn't have one under me. But you do have a chain of command, and you do have opportunities to bypass that chain of command if you think you're being wronged. And all those processes and procedures are still in place.
Mr. Chairman, there's so much, again, about the leadership equation that we talked about earlier, dealing with commanders, providing that kind of environment where people can talk and have an opportunity to go up the chain of command as well as down the chain of command. But leadership is really the most important part of what we're talking about right now.
Will it be monitored at all, complaints by chaplains as to if they feel that they've been chilled in their ability to serve?
Well, sir, the policy is still in place, but I will tell you that as a commander, I'm very sensitive, since we know that some chaplains may have concerns about this. The commanders in the fields are going to know those chaplains and are going to know whether or not they're going to have a concern with them. And then we'll find if that chaplain can't come to grips with dealing with this service member's particular challenge because of the service member's beliefs, then we'll get a chaplain that will be able to meet to his or her needs.
Mr. Chairman, although we aren't there yet with repeal, it's moving in that direction. After certification, if we get into the sustainment phase, my recommendation to Secretary Gates would be that these kinds of things would be the things we'd be looking for to ensure that we have a policy that's implemented fairly, equitably, and purposefully.
And I'm particularly hopeful that as you proceed, that there will be regulations and guidelines that could be real world understood by chaplains, so they don't feel that, in fact, they have truly lost their First Amendment rights. And so I really will be monitoring this and would like to see what's done. Another concern I have is that we will be providing troops in countries where the culture and laws provide that homosexual acts are culturally not approved or even illegal. Are our troops going to be briefed on this prior to going, and what kind of training will they receive?
Yes, sir. Prior to any service member's deployment overseas, we do cultural awareness training for the specific country or region that they're going to, and this will be included into that training.
And I thank you very much, and we'll proceed to Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that the issue of cost has been brought up, and I know during the debate there was discussion about the cost to the country, the cost to taxpayers for having to essentially dismiss, kick out members who were serving in the armed services. Dr. Stanley, do you happen to have the price tag on that?
No, Congresswoman Davis, I don't have the price tag on the numbers. You mean the numbers that were discharged, like pilots, special MOSs, things like that?
The numbers of service members who were discharged as a result of their homosexuality, who were essentially, were dismissed. I mean, as I recall, there was a price tag of about $300 million to dismiss those service members, and then you had the cost of actually recruiting and filling those skill sets in the services as well. I guess if you could just come back to the committee, and perhaps as we have opportunities down the line to have those numbers, that would be very helpful.
Absolutely.
I know that they were out there, and I think the first 13 years of the policy may be in the neighborhood of about $300 million.
Absolutely. I'd like to take that for the record and get back to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I also wanted to ask about the status of the several court cases that are seeking to end Don't Ask, Don't Tell. What would be any difference in the process if the decision was made by the courts regarding those cases?
Well, there are several court cases right now, and I know they're with the Department of Justice as they move those through the process. The Ninth Circuit, I believe, and I'm not sure where the other circuit is. But the bottom line is that I know that the Department of Justice is working those. They continue to move forward. I don't anticipate any other changes in terms of what we're doing in those court cases right now.
Okay, thank you. And if I could, Mr. Chairman, I happen to have just a report from the daily transcript in San Diego. There was a meeting there where Major General Ronald Bailey, who heads the Marine Recruiting Depot, was speaking to a group of service members and other individuals in San Diego, and just commenting on the fact that's been said here before. When asked about repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, he said he was very much in favor of it. It's about leadership, and my leadership philosophy is to treat everyone with respect and dignity. There's no separation. All I ask is that you be a Marine. So if I could put that in the record, sir. Thank you.
Without objection.
And I'll yield back my time. Thank you.
Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The former Commandant of the Marine Corps raised questions, General Conway, about billeting, and I believe about billeting his Marines, and I think that the statement was he would need extra funding, that he did not want to mix heterosexual Marines with homosexual Marines, and I think that and I suspect that his same rationale was why he doesn't insist on having men billeted directly with women, to avoid, not simply because of cultural issues, but also to avoid unwanted sexual contact. Have you all, when I was a soldier and a Marine, and I can remember sleeping in those squad bays, I think they've broken a lot of those up now. I think they still use them in a training environment, but I think after that they've gone to these, I think, 2-man or 2-woman rooms. Has that issue been discussed, and how will you deal with that?
Yes, Congressman Kaufman. The issue has been discussed, and I'm going to yield to my colleague here, but just say that as we approach that, the sexual orientation is a private, personal matter. We have not been putting in the issue of separate birthing is not something that we're going to be separating because of the sexual orientation, and I'm going to ask my colleague to address that in more detail.
Leadership has had billeting challenges between personalities as long as there's been leadership and personalities in commands, and it's going to be up to leadership to handle those on a case-by-case basis, as they have for centuries. And we don't anticipate it to be a problem.
Thank you. And with that, because we're repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, so obviously now we're saying that the behavior is acceptable. Sexual orientation in any form certainly is acceptable. Then why don't you simply remove the precautions, or why don't you simply change then that irrespective of not simply sexual orientation but gender, that people be housed together? If you're going to go down that road, why don't you completely go down that road?
We are dealing specifically with sexual orientation, which is very private, very personal. We are serving with servicemen and women every day, and in many cases don't even know where they are, which is where they orient themselves, unless they actually say something. And so what we have said and where we are today is that orientation, being private and personal, is a leadership issue that commanders can deal with, and commanders have the authority today to actually put people in separate rooms or have separate buildings if it's best for the command unit climate, morale, unit cohesion as you move forward. But that's a commander's call. The commander can do that.
Then, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. We now proceed to Ms. Tsongas.
You all have talked so much about the issue of leadership and the role of the commander, and we see that come up in many different contexts. And I'm just curious if you could talk about the specifics of the kind of training that are now going to commanders around the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. You know, do you walk them through various scenarios? What is the process for sort of implementing this repeal with the commander?
Very good question, ma'am. What the services wanted to make sure is that they didn't relearn lessons learned from previous training evolutions. And so the training is, a lot of effort went into the training, into what was the training content itself. It's a mixture of a video that describes process, procedures, policy, and then it breaks, and then it is a give and take, an exchange by one of the mentors of the training to pull out the key training aspects from what they had just witnessed. And in there, they also go into vignettes for whatever particular part of the policy or the procedure that was discussed in that video. Once that's out there, then they move on to the next part of the training. I went through it about 3 weeks ago, and I was very impressed with the quality of the content and the manner in which it was presented, and the ability to draw out conversation with the training audience. It was very good.
Do you envision, as we get into the sort of sustainment mode, I think that was the word, I think, Secretary Stanley, that you used, that this kind of training would continue to take place as new commanders sort of rise up through the chain and are tasked to deal with issues they may not have in a lesser spot, so that it's an ongoing, ever-present element of training of the commanders as they rise up?
Absolutely. I mean, the training, it's, I don't want to say phased, but we're doing the total force. At the same time that we're doing the entire force, we're also bringing in new recruits, so their training has to occur. So it will become part of not only the recruit, as recruits come in, as initial training, those that we might have missed, and then all the services will make it part of their general military training that covers many of the different issues that happen to be out there. So it will continue to be ongoing, just as we do anyway.
And then another question on the service academies. I happen to be on the Board of Visitors for the Air Force Academy, and I know that in discussing repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the thinking was to wait to see how you all come forward, what the recommendations are, but how will this be implemented in the service academies?
It's no different. The service academies had their experts trained, have their leadership trained, and then training the force, and their force is the future leadership once they graduate there. So a lot of effort going into that.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Ranking Member. Back in the mid-'90s, under the Clinton administration, I remember being a Brigade S3 at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and the reenlistment NCO came in and told me that there was a new mandate coming down from the administration. And this administration sent down it was called the Consideration of Others Training. And it was mandated monthly that we had to do it down to the platoon level, and then it became known by the soldiers as sensitivity training. And it was all of a matter of someone had said that the Army and certain parts of our military had too much of a warrior ethos. I hear what you're saying here now, that we're going to not just be a one-time training, that this now is going to be a sustained type of training. I understand in the education processes, you know, being at TBS or being at OBC or being at the service academies, but now are we really starting to talk about something that is going to continually be a monthly sustainment requirement in our units? Because it's one thing to train recruits when they come into the service, but now, you know, what happens, as you both know, having been commanders, you continue to have training within your units down to that platoon level, all the way up to the collective level. So what guarantee are you going to give me that, once again, the camel has not gotten his nose under the tent, and the next thing you know, this is going to become a monthly training requirement throughout the United States military?
Sir, the training that I was alluding to that we didn't want to go back to was that sensitivity training that we lived through in the mid-90s, which is why we put so much effort into this particular, the training venue and the model. So we did not want to do that again. No one enjoyed that back in the mid-90s. That I can't tell you that the training will be monthly. Ongoing training will be monthly. Don't imply that it will be monthly. What it will become part of is part of general military training that is ongoing. Honor, courage, commitment, treating people with dignity and respect, all of that goes into that. It'll be part of that reoccurring thing.
And Congressman West, I concur, echo what the Admiral said, but I'll also say that this is definitely not about changing people's beliefs and where they are. This is really about leadership, professionalism, discipline, and respect. It's about being good soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guard.
My only concern is that, as you all know, we are a military in combat. We are a military that is engaged. And there are so many training requirements that we already place out there on our units. And just the same as we have a government that places, you know, mandatory requirements and unfunded mandates on our state and local levels of government, I don't want to see us start to now, from a political aspect, mandate more training requirements, which takes away the training time that that young platoon leader, that young company commander needs to be able to have an effective fighting force. Because what I saw as a Brigade S3 was that the time that I spent having to do the consideration of others training, that was the time when guys were not at the rifle range, guys were not out there in the motor pool, guys were not out there shooting their artillery pieces. So please, go back to the administration and tell them that they just opened up a third combat theater of operations. Now is really not the time to play around with the lives of our men and women that are out there in combat. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Thank you, Colonel West, and we now have Ms. Pingree.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that, and thank you for the chance to talk about this a little bit more. I would just want to address a couple of things that have been part of our discussion here. I mean, first, as far as both the costs and the continuing training go, I think I see this differently than some people in the conversation. I think this is a transition we're asking our military to make, and I, in fact, have tremendous faith both in the leadership, which you've talked about quite a bit, and the ability of the leaders in the military to help our soldiers and everyone else to make this transition, but also in our armed services personnel themselves across the country. I mean, we've been through a lot of transitions in the military, whether it was integrating the military, whether it was the huge role that women now play in the military, and I believe that you've always risen to the task, and you've come forward. And so I think this won't be something you have to talk about month after month after month. This is going to change the culture, and then it'll be done. And I appreciate that. That's why I emphasize, you know, the faster you can do it, I think the more it will be an old conversation that we won't have to continually have. So that's my perspective on it. And the other side is the cost. People brought that up. I appreciate the fact that you said it costs $10,000 for the training materials, and I too am impressed if we can do this for a relatively low cost. But I'd also like to reiterate, even if it costs us money to go through the training process, which I think you're being thorough and very thoughtful about, I've seen numbers from the GAO that say that the cost of discharges between 2004 and 2009 was $193.3 million. I know you're going to validate in writing what this costs, but discharging soldiers, 14,000 members of the military who have been let go because of their sexual orientation. It's not only unconscionable that these people who were willing to serve their country and came forward were asked to leave, but the costs are horrendous. I was thinking about one of the soldiers that we've seen a lot about, Colonel Fehrenbach, who was highly decorated. It was $20 million worth of training that we put into his service, and then we asked him to leave. So to me, this is not only an unfair and unreasonable policy for all the reasons we've already discussed, but it seems to me it's been very expensive. And as you've talked about earlier, and I'd be happy to hear you talk any more about, we've lost many highly trained personnel, but losing anyone in the military is a trained soldier. So yes, there may be some members of the military who choose to leave, but I find it hard to believe it'll be equal to the costs of the numbers that have already left, and I think that's important to remember. I don't know if you have any comments about any of that, but. Well, thank you. I yield back my time, and I, again, appreciate the work that you're doing, and I hope that it continues at a rapid pace.
Thank you, Ms. Pingree. Ms. Hartzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wondering, are men and women currently housed together in the barracks? Do they shower together, men and women soldiers?
No, ma'am.
Why not?
Well, good order and discipline. And they choose not to do it. Leadership is smart not to do it, to keep them separated for good order and discipline.
Is it due to their sexual orientation?
No, ma'am, it's not. It's due to gender.
So there may be some opposite sex attraction there, and so it would disrupt order and discipline if they showered together and were housed together. Is that correct? By not separating the sexes? Right.
That's correct, ma'am.
How come then you said that this is due to sexual orientation, that there's not going to be any change in policy? What's the difference? It seems to me that you have a double standard here.
Well, one is because the gender is very public, and sexual preference is very private, and we're not asking about their sexual preference.
Well, I think you're not being consistent there, but I wanted to ask, will persons requesting reassignment for themselves or someone else due to their sexual privacy concerns be subject to negative fitness reports and other career penalties?
Absolutely not.
So you feel confident in this, that they will feel comfortable going to their commanders and expressing concerns with that without being penalized in any way?
That is our intent, and that's what we hold our leadership accountable to do.
Okay, shifting gears, I was a teacher, and so I care a lot about children. And as we're talking about training and education, I was wondering what training and education is being required of family members and children in DoD family support programs, schools, child care centers?
The family service centers, the websites, the family centers within the different services actually have training available on their websites. Military One Source, some other sources are actually available on the web, as well as doing them in their actually family centers, and commanders actually work toward that. It's not mandatory, not required, but certainly the training is there.
There's a lot of controversy, as you know, about different curriculum, LGBT curriculum in civilian schools, and I'm just wondering with DoD schools, will authorities make it possible for military families to have access to alternative education choices for their children, which do not mandate the use of LGBT curriculum in classrooms or extracurricular activities on bases?
I think the question is pretty heavy. I'd like to take that for the record and then take part of that. Okay. First of all, and the reason I'm taking it for the record is because I'm not versed in everything that's mandatory in the curriculum of our Dodge schools. The big issue, though, also is that most of our children are actually not in the schools. They're actually in the communities, out in society. Most of them are. And so looking at that a little bit more holistically is why I want to take it for the record, look at the curriculum, and then get back to you on the specifics of where we are on that. Thank you for the question, though.
You bet. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Ms. Hartzler. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, have you ever had to dismiss anybody from the service?
I have.
Was it because of their race?
No, it was not.
How about their gender?
No, it was not.
Their faith?
No, it was not.
Sexual orientation?
Yes, it was.
It was because of their sexual orientation?
My first command, VFA 15, had an incident shortly after Don't Ask, Don't Tell passed that a young sailor came forward through our chaplain, that he was gay, and we discharged him from the service.
Did you discharge him from the service because he was gay or because he violated a standard of conduct?
Because he was gay.
He did not violate a standard of conduct before he was dismissed?
He did not.
Well, that's not the answer I thought you would give, to be honest with you, Admiral.
It happens to be the truth.
Well, I appreciate that. Sometimes we don't get that from testimony.
You're welcome,
So somebody was dismissed simply because of their sexual orientation, not because of a code of conduct?
Yes, sir. And it was, if I could explain the situation.
Yes, sir.
Because it kind of cuts through this whole issue, and it was a defining moment for this young commanding officer. A crusty old command master chief, my command master chief, walks up to me and says, "Skipper, I've got a problem." And Master Chief, what's your problem? He says, "Well, Airman for pick a name, has come to me through the chaplain, and he's gay. I don't know how to handle this. I've never dealt with this before." I said, "Master Chief, I've got it," and called the chaplain in. And the chaplain had been working with this young sailor for some time through the individual mental trauma that he was having with this particular issue, and the chaplain said, "We need to bring it forward to the commanding officer," and that's how we handled it. And it was the chain of command working, and it was the chaplain doing his job working, given the situation that was confronted with us, with the law that was confronted with us.
How long ago was this?
Oh, now you're testing. This would have been 94, 95 time frame, I believe it was.
16, 17 years ago.
Yes, sir.
Are you aware of any other incident where somebody has been dismissed simply because of sexual orientation?
I'll have to get back to you on the record on the numbers of that. That was the one personal instance that I've had in my 5 command tours that we had to do that.
And your testimony before this committee is that there has been no violation of the standard of conduct?
Not that I'm aware of, no, sir. Now, there are instances where gay and lesbian were discharged, but there were also personnel conduct that was resulted with it. That was a factor as well.
Do you think that?
But in my case, that was not the case.
Do you think that in most cases, though, that there's a violation of the standard of conduct associated with the dismissal?
I'd say in very few cases, a standard of conduct involved.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. And at this time, we'll proceed to adjourn. And again, thank you for being here today. And I want to particularly thank the subcommittee members for being here today and remaining through the whole hearing. We are adjourned.